Hello, this is Mark Grier, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 16th issue of the New York Times, on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Okay, let's get started. First article. Mass protests across Ukraine oppose ouster of defense minister. Demonstrators demanded the reinstatement of Mikhailo Fedorov, who had come to symbolize Ukraine's success in using drones to strike back at Russia. Thousands of people took to the streets of cities across Ukraine on Thursday to protest the dismissal of Mikhailo Fedorov, the country's young and tech-minded defense minister, just 6 months into his tenure. The demonstrations were only the second large street protests in Ukraine during more than 4 years of war. Rallies also took place last year against a move by President Zelensky to neuter anti-corruption agencies. On Thursday, protesters poured into a square in central Kyiv, the capital. They turned out in Odessa in the south and in Lviv in the west. In the frontline city of Kharkiv in the northeast, more than 300 protesters with cardboard signs crowded sidewalks, chanting, "Shame, shame, shame." Their numbers grew as the morning wore on. "Hands off Fedorov," one sign read. "Why break what's working?" read another. The protesters were dismayed that Mr. Zelensky had ousted his defense minister. Just as many military analysts were saying, the war had turned in Ukraine's favor. The shift is more marked than any since the conflict first months, when Russia endured a series of defeats. Mr. Fedorov, 35, is a prominent proponent of the use of unmanned systems in the war. He had come to symbolize Ukraine's success in using long-range drones to strike military and oil industry targets inside Russia and to wage an intense campaign to cut off occupied Crimea. His removal prompted despair among many protesters who saw it as a victory for an old guard inside the military and for a defense industry that has disagreed with his vision of the future of war. Variations of Fedorov is innovation, old grandpas are degeneration, appeared on many of the cardboard signs. At a news conference in Kyiv, Mr. Fedorov defended his record and said that he had urged Mr. Zelensky to remove the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, but that the president had declined. Mr. Fedorov, who clashed repeatedly with the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces over war strategy, accused him of blocking all of our initiatives. Instead of figuring out how to defeat Russia systematically, Mr. Fedorov said, referring to the drone campaign he championed, they had figured out how to split the country. He had made no public comments as early as Thursday afternoon. Mr. Fedorov acknowledged the anger on the streets. "Today we see that the Ukrainian people have taken a stand," he said, adding, "Why is it that now, when hopes have emerged and the initiative has been seized, this trajectory is breaking?" At the protest in Kharkiv, Maria Chepelina, 12, stood quietly with her grandfather, holding a sign that read, "Bring back Fedorov." It was her first time protesting, Maria said. Most of her friends were home, she added, but she felt it was important to come out and make her feelings known. "Winning the war is the most important thing," she said, and Mr. Fedorov had been doing great work. "Our president wants to overthrow him because he's doing a good job," she said. "People don't like it, and neither do I. We want the president to hear us, she added, as her grandfather looked on, proud of her English and her civic sensibility. We need to speak. The call for Thursday's street protests came from Dmytro Kazakinsky, a war veteran who in July orchestrated the demonstrations against Mr. Zelensky's crackdown on anti-corruption agencies. These demonstrations, known as the cardboard protests for their hastily drawn signs, ultimately led Mr. Zelensky to reverse course. On Thursday, at least 1,000 people gathered in the square in central Kyiv at a spot within earshot of Mr. Zelensky's office on Bankova Street. The crowd of mostly young people stamped their feet, waving signs and demanding the resignation of Mr. Syrsky, who is the commander-in-chief. I really worry about what is happening now, said Andrea Fedun, 54, a retired psychologist. He said he previously supported Mr. Zelensky, admiring the president's diplomacy in rallying the world to Ukraine's side, but believed that firing a popular defense minister just as the war turned in Ukraine's favor was a mistake. The Russians dream of our having internal problems, he said. Why remove him now? There was no immediate response from Mr. Zelensky on Thursday as images of protests ricocheted across social media. At least one senior military official said he was resigning in protest. Colonel Pavlo Yelizarov, the deputy commander of Ukraine's air forces. This is a great evil for the country's defense capability, he wrote in a Facebook post alongside a resignation letter, warning that abandoning Mr. Fedorov's strategic air defense reforms would lead to more damage for Russian strikes. In Kharkiv, Katerina Akrapova, a protester who works at an IT company, said that Ukraine could win the war only by having a young, reformed system with new approaches rather than with outdated Soviet approaches to life, war, and regulations. Some serving soldiers joined the demonstrations. Navary Yermenko, 25, protested what he called a glaring injustice, saying he hoped that the power of the people, the power of free speech, will bring more sanity to the legislative system of Ukraine. He pointed to Ukraine's deep strikes into Russia, its campaign to cut off Crimea, and its attacks on Moscow to ramp up pressure on President Putin as proof of Mr. Fedorov's value. Me and my brothers in arms, we see an increase in efficiency, he said. The crowd behind him chanted, Parliament, say no, urging lawmakers to reject Mr. Zelensky's choice to replace Mr. Fedorov, reported to be the Interior Minister, Ihor Klimenko. Mr. Fedorov's departure comes during a broader government reshuffling that has included the resignation of Prime Minister Yuria Sededenko. Mr. Zelensky replaced her, with Sarai Kortesky, the chief executive of the National Oil and Gas Company. All right, moving on. Next article. In Iran, Trump risks another American forever war. President Trump, who promised to end wars, not start them, may have fallen into a familiar presidential trap. No one starts a war expecting it to last forever. Yet, since Vietnam, American presidents have repeatedly gotten into conflicts that seem like they could last forever, at least until the next president, or the one after that. Decades that the expense and political pain are not worth it, declares victory, and goes home. On Iran, President Trump may have fallen into the same trap. He campaigned for office vowing to end wars, not start them, and to never get involved in a forever war, let alone one in the Middle East. And yet, he risks doing so in Iran, his critics say. The war that Israel and the United States began with such force has alternated between moments of negotiation and military strikes. Excuse me. They have failed so far to reach Mr. Trump's stated goals of regime change or ending Iran's nuclear program, while the war has created a new, seemingly intractable problem, bottling up the Strait of Hormuz. With diplomacy at a dead end, at least for now, a frustrated Mr. Trump finds himself back at war, the ceasefire broken, the strait blocked. The Memorandum of Understanding, he said, achieves everything we set out to accomplish, despite wildly divergent interpretations of it, is in tatters after less than a month. Both sides looked to the Memorandum of Understanding as the continuation of the war by other means, not as a bridge to peace, said Ali Fayez, Iran project director for the International Crisis Group. Without a long-term strategy to produce a sustainable settlement, he said, there's a risk of creating the circumstances for a forever war. The idea of the forever wars began with 9/11 and the global war on terror, pulling the United States into a long military engagement with troops on the ground in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Those conflicts, which began by toppling hostile regimes before turning into counterinsurgency campaigns, ended either inconclusively or in defeat after considerable expenditure and loss of life. Powerful leaders with powerful militaries are prone to fall into the short war fallacy, said Lawrence Friedman, a professor of war studies at King's College in London, who last year wrote an article, The Age of Forever Wars. They think they can win quickly and not suffer adverse consequences, he said. Like Mr. Trump in Iran and President Putin of Russia in Ukraine, they fail to appreciate the limits of military power and so set objectives that can be achieved, if at all, only through prolonged struggle, Mr. Freeman said. And even the most sophisticated military forces are not enough if there is not strategy to turn battlefield superiority into lasting political and diplomatic success. Mr. Trump faces the added challenge of trying to win using only air and sea power, without politically unpalatable use of ground troops on Iranian soil. The Persian Gulf War of 1991 was quick and succeeded in its aims because President George H.W. Bush had a limited political objective: drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. That was a lesson lost on his son, President George W. Bush, in the second war against Iraq, which ended up enhancing Iran's power in the region. In Afghanistan, after the younger Bush drove out the Taliban, he and his successors tried vainly to remake the society, but when Washington tired of the effort, the Taliban returned. There is an argument, sometimes made by Mr. Trump himself, that he went to war in Iran to finally end what he considered a 47-year war between the United States and Iran, which began with the fall of the Shah of Iran in 1979 and the taking of more than 60 American hostages. The U.S.-Iran forever war, argued Vali Nasser, a professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, is just another round of a conflict that has sometimes blown hot and sometimes resulted in agreement. like the 2015 nuclear deal Mr. Trump tore up in 2018. Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, said Mr. Trump, urged by Israel, has also inserted himself into a parallel forever war, the one between Israel and Iran, which is being played out with Iran's proxies in Lebanon, the Palestinian territories in Yemen. Mr. Trump still has the ability to sell this unpopular war to his base as a victory of some kind and go home. But to the surprise of many, he seems to be doubling down, albeit with no clear path to a diplomatic settlement. And his commitment to keep the Strait of Hormuz open while Iran insists on maintaining control could mean a very long American military engagement, even with the help of allies. Still, the Iran war is different, especially compared to Afghanistan and the second war in Iraq. In both of those wars, thousands of American troops were on the ground for long periods of time and ended up fighting militias and terrorists opposed to new government propped up by the United States, not fighting a state like Iran. And unlike the case in Vietnam, Iraq, or Afghanistan, Iran can inflict economic pain on the United States by blocking access to the Strait of Hormuz, which gives Tehran more effective leverage and is a prime reason it will refuse to give up control. There will be no return to this situation before the war, said Suzanne Maloney, Director of Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institute. As in Iraq, American assumptions and misperceptions changed the balance of power in the region, she said, and now the days of the Strait of Hormuz fully free for transit are probably over. There can be a new normal, she said, but with a much higher American force posture in the region, given Iran's ability to hit ships whenever it pleases. Because Washington's stakes in this war are simply smaller than those for Iran, said Mr. Nasser, who worked on the Afghan war, the pace begins to slow, while the other side is willing to keep the same level of intensity. As America began to withdraw from Afghanistan as from Vietnam, the balance began to shift. But a negotiated end to the war in Iran still feels far away. Both sides have proven they can't even stick to a minimal framework agreement that defers all the substantive issues to the future, Mr. Vez said. If they can't even do that, he added, that could remove the last barrier between episodic confrontation and a forever war. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. Smoke floating far from Canada's wildfires will darken skies again on Thursday. Here's what to know about the smoke and when it might end. The strip of dense wildfire smoke can be seen on satellites stretching from the upper Midwest and Canada across the Great Lakes, through southern Ontario and New England, and down to New York City. Some of it is even traveling out over the Atlantic Ocean and back up to the far eastern coastline of Canada. Weather forecasters expect the smoke to darken skies again on Thursday across North America and send air quality readings surging to dangerous levels in many places. Three big questions about wildfire smoke. Where will the smoke go on Thursday? The day is likely to unfold very much as Wednesday did, forecasters said. The densest smoke will move south throughout the day, and it may even dip as far as Maryland this time. Around New York, expect the worst conditions in the afternoon and evening. When will it end? Well, the smoke is spreading so widely this week because the same heat dome that has led to brutally high temperatures in the Midwest and the Northeast has trapped the smoke close to the ground. By the weekend, as another weather system pushes the hottest air away, both the heat and the smoke are expected to ease in the Northeast, forecasters said. But closer to the fires, the smoke is likely to linger longer. Where is the air quality the worst? The worst air quality is in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Ontario, where the wildfires are actively burning. But as far away as Toronto and New York, the air quality index was still likely to reach unhealthy levels through the day on Thursday. The EPA estimated that many places that were affected by smoke on Wednesday would experience similar conditions on Thursday or even a little worse. Air quality readings of 100 or higher are a warning to people who have respiratory conditions to take precautions. Above 150, the air is considered unhealthy for people who are not in a sensitive group. Above 200, the air is very unhealthy. Above 300, the air is hazardous. The scale, which runs from 0 to 500, was designed by the EPA and measures the density of 5 different pollutants in the air: ground level ozone, particulates, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. Several spots in the northeastern Minnesota, closest to the fires, recorded had AQI readings well into the hazardous range on Wednesday. Toronto's AQI was briefly among the worst in the world on Wednesday, and by the evening, every U.S. state from Minnesota to Connecticut had some location where the air quality index had reached unhealthy levels. At 10 p.m. on Wednesday night, as some of the thickest plumes of smoke moved well south of the international border, Minneapolis was at 287. Detroit was at 196. New York City was at 192, and Scranton, Pennsylvania was at 157, according to Air Now, which is run by the EPA. What else to know about the smoke? Well, as climate change drives up global temperatures past record levels, the frequency of days when it is both hot and polluted has also been increasing. Claire Brown and Christina Kelso of the Times Climate Team wrote about several factors that are converging to amplify health risks during sweltering days. Wildfires can generate unhealthy levels of smoke. Danny Bloom of Well wrote about what you can do to protect yourself even far from the fires. When the air is smoky, it is important to consider whether it is safe to exercise outdoors and how to protect yourself if you choose to head out. Okay, let's move on. Next article. Trump administration argues for fencing off park next to the White House. The Commission of Fine Arts is set to consider the administration's proposal regarding Lafayette Square Park, which has been the site of numerous protests. A federal design panel on Thursday will consider the Trump administration's plan to add a permanent fence around Lafayette Square Park, a public space next to the White House that is frequently the site of protests. The move comes as President Trump and the Secret Service say that they are concerned about the security of the White House during protests. The administration's submission to the panel, the Commission of the Fine Arts, includes photos of pro-Gaza graffiti left in the park and of standoffs between the police officers and protesters. The administration said that there were several examples of assemblies that elevate into non-peaceful demonstrations which have resulted in violence towards law enforcement officers maintaining the necessary standoff from restricted areas and vandalism. The Commission of Fine Arts, which advises the administration on design projects in Washington, is also set on Thursday to consider a proposal to build a 33,000 square foot security screening facility to visitors to the White House, the latest major change to the grounds overseen by Mr. Trump. But it is the proposal to add permanent fencing to Lafayette Square Park that has drawn opposition from people who believe it runs counter to the free speech activities that frequently take place there. Representative Eleanor Holmes of Holmes North, a Democrat who represents the District of Columbia, has introduced a bill to prohibit permanent fencing at the park. Lafayette Square has long become First Amendment demonstrations, vigils, and public gatherings, Ms. Norton said in a statement. Adding permanent fencing at Lafayette Square would send the wrong message to the nation and the world by continuing to transform our democracy from one that is accessible and of the people to one that is exclusive and fearful of its own citizens. All right, next article. The FDA approves a new pill to slash cholesterol levels. The new pills can lower cholesterol levels far below what can be achieved with statins, clinical trials have shown. The Food and Drug Administration approved a daily pill on Thursday that can lower cholesterol levels far below what can be achieved with statins, the cheap cholesterol-reducing pills. The drug, Inclisiran, whose brand name is Lipfendra, is made by the pharmaceutical company Merck. Clinical trials have shown that it can bring levels of LDL, the dangerous type of cholesterol, down to 50 or 60 or even lower. Adults not taking cholesterol-lowering drugs usually have levels above 100. It works by inhibiting a protein known as PCSK9. New cholesterol guidelines issued by the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology say that people who have an above-average risk of heart attacks or strokes should get their LDL levels below 70. Those at high risks because, for example, they have had a heart attack, should get their LDL below 55. Lipfendra's list price will be $315 for a 30-day supply, and it will be available in a few weeks, said a Merck spokeswoman Julia Cunningham. There are currently injectable drugs that work in the same way, but they are more expensive, with list prices of $500 to $600 a month or more. Insurers sometimes balk at paying, and some patients do not want injections. Only 1% of the 6 million eligible patients use the injected drugs. Yet, a PCSK9 inhibitor can reduce the risk of heart attacks by 20% in high-risk patients. Cardiologists not associated with Merck applauded the FDA approval and the drug's price. The hope is that a pill that costs less than an injectable is an easier to take will allow many more patients to get their cholesterol levels under control. I'm thrilled, said Dr. Christopher Cannon, a cardiologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, who consults for several drug companies, but not Merck. This would make a big difference compared with the cost of injectable PCSK9 inhibitors, said Dr. David Moran, a preventive cardiologist at Stanford. Last November, Merck reported results from a 24-week clinical trial of the drug, which involved 2,912 people. The drug lowered LDL levels by up to 60%, and there was no difference in side effects between the drug and the placebo. Those results are the same as what have been seen with the injectable drugs. In studies of the injectable drugs, blocking PCSK9 reduced the incidence of heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular deaths by 20% in high-risk people. Merck is conducting a study now to see if the drug has the same effect. Dr. Dean Li, president of Merck Research Laboratories, said he is confident that it will. Dr. Li said the company wants to make lowering cholesterol with this new drug as easy and convenient as it is with a statin. Primary care doctors can prescribe it. It does not have to be limited to cardiologists. And he said patients are used to taking daily pills. Most who are at risk for a heart attack already take at least a blood pressure pill, a statin, and an aspirin. It's not clear yet whether companies making injectable PCSK9 inhibitors will lower their prices in order to compete. Okay, next article. Almost half of the House Democrats vote to end aid to Israel. The measure failed, but the level of support among Democrats exposed a stark shift in the party away from backing the Jewish state. The House on Wednesday rejected a measure to eliminate U.S. aid to Israel, but almost half of Democrats supported the move, reflecting a rapid and dramatic shift within the party away from decades of unequivocal support for the Jewish state. The measure, which sought to cut all $3.3 billion in military and humanitarian aid to Israel from a foreign affairs spending bill, failed by a vote of 104 to 314, with 10 voting present and all but one Republican, Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky, a sponsor, voting no. But more Democrats supported it than opposed it, including many who said they voted in favor despite their opposition to the cuts to humanitarian aid. It was the latest and starkest evidence of a major divide over backing Israel within the Democratic Party, which is grappling with a groundswell of hostility in its ranks towards Israel and its conduct of the war in Gaza. Supporters said the measure was their only way to register their opposition to the actions of the Israeli government in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon, and their desire for a fundamental change in course in the U.S. relationship with Israel. While I wish we could vote on an amendment targeted just to military aid, and of course support humanitarian programs, we do not have that option, Representative Greg Kasser, Democrat of Texas, and the chairman of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, wrote in a letter to his members, in which he urged all 98 of them to follow his lead in backing the proposal. The American people are crying out for an end to U.S. tax dollars subsidizing Israel's military. The vote even split Democratic leaders. Representatives Hakeem Jeffries of New York, the minority leader, and Pete Aguilar of California, the number 3 Democrat, voted against the measure, while Representatives Catherine Clark of Massachusetts, the minority whip, voted in favor. Ms. Clark said she supported the measure not because I agree with the entirety of the amendment or the GOP's cynical motivations for its consideration, but because I believe we must change course. In a statement shortly before the vote, Representatives Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, and the former Speaker called the amendment an unfortunate choice, but said she would support it for the message that it sends. In the final tally, 103 Democrats voted to cut off aid, while 98 opposed doing so, with another 10 voting present, declining to register a position. That amounts to more than half of the Democratic caucus unwilling to reject a measure that would terminate U.S. assistance to Israel. For weeks leading up to the vote, Democrats have struggled with how to respond to the measure proposed by Mr. Massie, who opposes foreign intervention, which they viewed as a tactic to put them in a political bind. Mr. Jeffries, a longtime staunch supporter of Israel, hosted 2 caucus meetings to discuss the amendment, a highly unusual move that underscored how fraught the politics around Israel have become for Democrats. And in a letter on Tuesday announcing his opposition, Mr. Jeffries also called for the first time for a major reset in U.S.-Israel relations. He also hinted that Democrats, should they win the majority in Congress, would insist that any security aid to Israel be contingent on barring human rights abuses against Palestinians. Even in opposing the measure, Mr. Jeffries, who is in line to be elected Speaker next year if Democrats win back the House, acknowledged that there would be good faith reasons that will result in members voting in a variety of different ways. But scores of Democrats swallowed their concerns about the measure and backed it. Self-defense does not include indiscriminately bombing homes, Representative Joaquin Castro, Democrat of Texas, said on the House floor, criticizing the response by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government to the terror attacks of October 7th. Even a one-time Israel stalwart, Representative Seth Moulton, Democrat of Massachusetts, said he supported cutting off all aid, asserting that we simply cannot continue to condone Netanyahu's actions that are against our moral conscience and our own national security interests by perpetuating the status quo. Mr. Moulton, who is running for Senate, has also said he would no longer accept donations from AIPAC, the hard-right pro-Israel lobbying group that has recently become a toxic brand among Democrats. Only a few Democratic voices spoke on the House floor on Wednesday in opposition to the measure. Representative Brad Sherman, Democrat of California, said the sole purpose of the bill was driving a wedge in the middle of the Democratic Party to put our party on the side of those that say that Israel has no right to exist. And Representative Steny Hoyer, Democrat of Maryland, and a longtime ally of AIPAC's, encouraged his colleagues to vote no, arguing that a vote for the measure was a vote against American security and against American safety. The vote was difficult for some Democrats to navigate, in part because of timing. It came as the United States and Iran had restarted their war, which President Trump entered at Israel's urging, and weeks after 3 incumbent Democrats lost primaries to far-left challengers, who made their records of supporting Israel a major line of attack. The shifting dynamics are not lost on the members of Congress, said Jeremy Ben-Ami, the president of J Street, a center-left lobbying group. Navigating this moment and trying to find solid ground where you feel comfortable is a challenge. Support for the Jewish state has quickly become a major liability with young and left-leaning voters who are important constituencies in the party. But there are indications that the hostility is much broader. A New York Times Siena National poll conducted in May found that 74% of Democratic voters opposed providing additional economic and military support to Israel, including large majorities in all age groups. In the lead-up to the vote, J Street said it opposed the measure, but the group also said that members could, in good conscience, vote yes, no, or present because it was one of the few opportunities to cast a recorded vote expressing opposition to the way American military assistance and American supplied weapons have been used by the Israeli government. Mr. Ben-Ami said the final vote was emblematic of the dramatic change that has already taken place, perhaps the quickest 180-degree shift in public opinion on a policy issue since the legislation of same-sex marriage. The days of Israel right or wrong being the mainstream of American politics are over, he said. We're defining the new normal. Ahead of the vote, Mr. Massey, who recently lost a primary to Trump-backed challenger who made his opposition to aiding Israel a major line of attack, said his amendment was common sense. We're sending more money to Israel in this bill than we spent on homeless veterans in this country, he said on the House floor. We should stop it. We should put them on a diet. They're the biggest welfare recipient of the United States. But some pro-Israel Democrats said that they were deeply alarmed by the shift in their party that allowed members to align with them. Supporting the U.S.-Israel relationship is quickly becoming a minority view among congressional Democrats. A shockingly systemic shift in a brief period of time. Representative Josh Gottenmeier, a New Jersey Democrat who is a steadfast supporter of Israel, said in an interview, "You have socialists running on an anti-American platform. Yes to Hamas and no to supporting one of our closest Democratic allies." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. Members of Congress intensify criticism of Immigration Detention Center. Lawmakers are continuing to urge action at Delaney Hall in Newark, where the conditions have been described by detainees and demonstrators. Members of Congress are denouncing conditions at an immigration detention center in New Jersey that has been a flashpoint in President Trump's expanding deportation campaign, calling for an overhaul of the facility. Criticism over conditions at the detention center, Delaney Hall, grew louder after the New York Times published an article last week that provided the first documented evidence of deficiencies in its medical care and kitchens. Health inspection reports, court filings, and other public records illustrated a pattern of problems that have persisted since the Trump administration began using the detention center in New Jersey, in Newark, to incarcerate immigrants last year, the Times found. Representative Frank Pallone, a Democrat from New Jersey, wrote a letter urging Markwayne Mullin, the Homeland Security Secretary, to take immediate action to carry out a comprehensive review of conditions inside Delaney Hall and to share a plan to fix the problems there. The detention center has 1,000 beds and is run by GEO Group, one of the largest private prison operators in the United States, under a 15-year, $1 billion federal contract. The Department of Homeland Security has dismissed concerns about conditions at Delaney Hall and said that politicians were inciting violent riots by demonstrators who have gathered for weeks outside the detention center as complaints from detainees have mounted. Another day, another hoax about ICE detention facilities, said Lauren Biss, a Homeland Security Department spokeswoman. No lawbreakers in the history of human civilization have been better treated than illegal aliens. They are provided 3 meals a day, medical care, and receive full due process. GEO Group did not immediately respond to a request for comment, but the company had previously disputed allegations of substandard conditions included in federal and state reports. The Times reported that federal and state inspectors had identified a litany of unsanitary and dirty conditions, including potato salad that was roughly 40 degrees warmer than was considered safe, and unsanitized food preparation services. Mr. Pallone, who, along with other Democratic lawmakers, had previously called for shutting down Delaney Hall, said that he was frustrated by the federal government's efforts to block state inspectors who had sought for months to access the detention center's housing and medical units. On Wednesday, he said he had not heard back from officials at Immigration and Customs Enforcement or from its parent agency, the Homeland Security Department. I think the problem that you have here with ICE and this GEO group is that they don't want anybody to know what's going on, right? Mr. Pallone said in a phone interview, if you're a taxpayer and you want to know that your hard-earned dollars are being used for the right purpose and not for inhumane treatment of people. On Facebook, Representative Nellie Powell, a fellow Democrat from New Jersey, said that GEO Group has been trying to hide the true extent of the inhumane conditions. New Jersey's Attorney General Jennifer Davenport had sued the federal government to force the center to allow state health inspectors inside so that they could evaluate infection control measures. The suit is pending. In court filings responding to the lawsuit, the federal government had argued that the inspections are part of state and local efforts to interfere with or disrupt federal operations and contracts and to harass federal contractors. The Department of Justice said that New Jersey officials want to inspect Delaney Hall to advance the state's interest in closing it. The American Civil Liberties Union of New Jersey said that it was reviewing the findings in the Times article as it continues to investigate conditions at Delaney Hall. The criticism regarding Delaney Hall grew more urgent and emotional after the killings of two men by immigration officials during traffic stops elsewhere in the United States in recent days. On Monday, religious organizations led a protest of about 100 demonstrators outside Delaney Hall to denounce the deaths of Lorenzo Salgado Arroyo, who was killed in Houston on July 7th, and Joan Sebastian Guerrero, who was killed in Bideford, Maine on Monday. Nancy Heimstra, a professor at Stony Brook University, who specializes in the economies of immigration detention facilities, said that because access to Delaney Hall has been tightly restricted, the findings reported by the Times could represent a small fraction of the center's shortcomings. The federal government's own oversight agencies had been drastically reduced during the Trump administration, she said. That's probably just the tip of the iceberg, she said. It's really hard to get accurate information about what is going on. Okay, next article. New York Times files motion to squash subpoenas of its journalists. The Justice Department is seeking to compel grand jury testimony as part of an investigation into Times reporting on the president's new Air Force One jet. The New York Times filed a motion on Wednesday to quash subpoenas issued by the Trump administration to several of its journalists last week. The Justice Department subpoenas, which were delivered Friday evening by federal agents who showed up at reporters' homes, sought to compel the Times journalists to testify about their confidential sources before a federal grand jury in Manhattan. The reporters had recently published articles that disclosed security concerns about President Trump's new Qatari-donated Air Force One jet. In a statement on Wednesday, David McCraw, the Times' top newsroom lawyer, called the subpoenas abusive and improper and said they had been brought in bad faith to punish the Times for its coverage. They violate the constitutional rights of the Times and its journalists, Mr. McCraw wrote. We are going to court to defend our journalistic rights to report freely on the administration and to provide the public with stories that matter. The motion was filed under seal, pursuant to court order, Mr. McCraw said. He wrote that the Times believes that the public has a right to information about this case and is also seeking to have the papers unsealed. Contacted on Wednesday, a spokeswoman for the Department of Justice, Emily Covington, referred to her previous statement that the press plays an important role in the country. But DOJ also plays an important role to make sure that the people entrusted with our nation's secrets do what they're supposed to do with that information. We recognize there may also be natural tensions there, but we are not going to ignore the law, she added. The Justice Department issued the subpoenas after the White House instructed Kash Patel, the director of Federal Bureau of Investigation, to supervise a leak investigation into the Times reporting. Mr. Trump had become enraged, about the coverage of the security concerns surrounding the new Air Force One jet, which he used to fly to Turkey last week. When Mr. Trump departed Turkey, he instead used the older Air Force One at the urging of Secret Service officials. It is highly unusual for the Justice Department to subpoena journalists at the onset of a leak investigation, which typically involves a hunt for federal employees who may have disclosed classified information. In a statement on Wednesday, a White House official said the administration took leaks seriously and will do everything legally to ensure the individual or individuals are caught and it does not happen again. The subpoenas were issued by Jay Clayton, the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, who Mr. Trump recently nominated to serve as Director of National Intelligence. At his Senate confirmation hearing on Wednesday, Mr. Clayton said his office had consulted with the Justice Department in Washington and followed procedures that we have in place to protect the First Amendment and protect the freedom of the press and not result in intimidation of journalists. But Mr. Clayton also said government leakers should not be able to get away with sharing classified materials by exploiting the protections afforded to journalists. In a pointed reply, Senator Michael Bennet, a Colorado Democrat, said the First Amendment was not a loophole. Todd Blanche, the acting Attorney General, whom Mr. Trump has nominated to lead the Justice Department, said at his own Senate confirmation hearing on Wednesday that he had authorized the subpoenas. We are not targeting reporters. They are material witnesses, Mr. Blanche said, just like a reporter who would be a material witness to a car crash. 3 Times reporters received subpoenas: Julian Barnes, Eric Lipton, and Eric Schmidt. The newspaper learned that subpoenas were prepared for 2 others, Adam Goldman and Tyler Pager, but neither received one. In a video published by the Times on Wednesday, Joe Kahn, the Times executive editor, described the subpoenas as a naked attempt to intimidate New York Times and to keep us from reporting on matters that we think are essential to national security. Mr. Kahn, a former China correspondent, said he had seen the way an authoritarian government can keep journalists from reporting on a huge amount of news and information that's very clearly in the public interest. It's really essential to American democracy that that kind of erosion of press freedoms not happen here, Mr. Kahn said. Okay, the next and possibly last article for today. TSMC adds $100 billion to its U.S. spending plan. The pledge from the Taiwanese chip-making giant brought the total commitment to its fast-growing operations in Arizona to $265 billion. Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company announced on Thursday that it planned to spend an additional $100 billion on its operations in the United States. The giant chip maker, which produces chips designed by NVIDIA, Apple, and others, had previously pledged to invest $165 billion to expand its operations near Phoenix. That brings the company's total commitment to its fast-growing footprint in Arizona to $265 billion. The announcement made during TSMC's quarterly earnings presentation is partly in response to increasing political pressure on foreign semiconductor companies to locate factories in the United States. TSMC broke ground on its first factory in Arizona in 2021 during the Biden administration. But the Trump administration has threatened trading partners with high tariffs if they don't set up manufacturing operations in the United States to bring money and jobs. Samsung Electronics has 2 chip manufacturing sites in Texas, while SK Hynix, another big South Korean memory chip maker, is building a facility in Indiana. The new $100 billion commitment from TSMC would include building 4 new chip fabricating factories known as fabs for the company's contract manufacturing business. That would be in addition to 6 semiconductor fabs, 2 advanced chip packaging facilities, and a research and development center in Arizona. The factories, announced on Thursday, would likely be located on a new chip-making campus on 900 acres of land that the company purchased earlier this year. The investment would bring advanced semiconductor manufacturing back to America, said Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Commerce Secretary, said in a statement released after TSMC's announcement. C.C. Wei, TSMC's chief executive, said that the pace of the build-out would depend on the market situation. When asked about the construction scheduled on the earnings call, Mr. Wei said, "We don't have it today, but we do have a plan, and we will try to speed up as much as possible." Mr. Wei emphasized that TSMC is also expanding in Taiwan and Japan. The factory building in America and elsewhere, Mr. Wei said, was mainly to address the soaring chip demand from the AI megatrend, as he put it. The robust demand was reflected in the company's second quarter performance. Its revenue grew to the equivalent of $40.2 billion, 36% higher than a year earlier. Profit jumped nearly 80% in the quarter to just over $22 billion. TSMC expects strong revenue and profit growth this year and next. But during the call, TSMC's executives repeatedly said their strategy was designed to meet long-term demand and to advance its leading-edge chip-making technology. The company plans capital spending to reach up to $64 billion this year. Okay, so you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 16th issue of the New York Times. Your reader today has been Mark Grier. Thank you so much for listening.